Okay, so never have a management information systems major do research on you. You forgot that my favorite color is yellow. Thank you, Tafara. It was a lovely introduction. I want to begin this morning by thanking President Moorhead, Chancellor Huckabee, SGA President and songster John L. Simpson, and the woman who made me wake up way early this morning, Dr. Michelle Cook, for the invitation for being here. I also want to say thank you to the superintendent, to the mayor for joining us this morning. Although I have a bit of a bone to pick with the superintendent and with Dr. Cook, because having me come after the cutest children in the world is just wrong. I'm here this morning because I believe in what we do. I grew up in Mississippi, as Tafara told you. In fact, half of my speech has to go now. But I grew up in Mississippi, the daughter of parents who were very involved in the civil rights movement, who were very involved in civil justice. We moved to Atlanta when I was a junior in high school, and I attended Spelman College. My freshman year at Spelman was 91-92, and in 1992, the world exploded. It was April of '92, and the Rodney King verdict was announced in Los Angeles. And the streets erupted with a violence that hadn't been seen in decades. Here in Georgia, in Atlanta, I was part of a group of students who led a silent protest down to City Hall from downtown Atlanta to talk about the issues that were facing our communities. We lived in the privileged gates of Spelman and Morehouse, of Clark, Atlanta, and Morris Brown, not unlike the ideal that is Athens. But we had neighbors who lived outside those privileged gates, who lived in the oldest housing projects in the state of Georgia. Men and women who never thought of going to college, who barely imagined graduating from high school, and they woke up every morning to see the edifices of our colleges, knowing that they would never be inside. And so I understood that while what they did was wrong, that the riots that happened in Atlanta were dangerous, I also understood that they were expressing an impotence and an outrage, and they took it out by expressing that outrage against their neighbors, by letting their frustrations be expressed in hurling bottles. And although I helped lead the peaceful protest, because that's what you can do when you're a student, I understood what drove those angry young men and women whose lives could have followed my path, or my life could have followed theirs. I understood what made them shout epithets and set fires, because I'd grown up with what my mother likes to call genteel poverty. We had no money, but we had class, we watched PBS, and we read books. My mom used to tell us it was genteel poverty because she knew that we had to live up to an expectation and not down to reality. I have cousins who have multiple children and who have never finished high school. I have neighbors who lived on the street that I grew up on who never imagined going to college or graduate school, who never imagined being able to sit at that table of esteemed and wonderful young men and women who will change the world, because they were born on the wrong side of the tracks. But my mother and my father wanted us to understand that what we were doing, that what we had an opportunity for, was not our own, that it was the product of hard work, it was the product of my parents being willing to dream, and it was not guaranteed. My parents understood the violence and the anger that seethed in those communities, not only in Atlanta, but I promise you in some pockets of Athens. My parents understood it because they had come from far worse than I did. My dad likes to joke that he was from the wrong side of the tracks and my mom was from the wrong side of the tracks. So my parents had lived not only with the psychic violence of poverty, they did so in Mississippi in the 1950s and 60s, where poverty was systematically enshrined through Jim Crow laws and a refusal to grant them full citizenship. This was a country and a state where they saw the injustice of a world where my grandfather could cook at a university he was not allowed to attend, and my grandmother could clean a voting booth she could not enter and cast a ballot through. My parents attended segregated schools with books that were cast off by their white peers at the better school down the street. And in those books, the Civil War was known as the War of Northern Aggression, and Lincoln made a really big mistake with that whole emancipation thing. Still, despite their lack of access, my parents and my grandparents and my aunts and uncles were part of the civil rights movement. Mom and Dad found their own ways to serve even though they were just teenagers. And they rejoiced with millions when President Johnson and Congress put into law their right to ride buses and to sit at lunch counters and to shop in stores. But my parents understood that the Civil Rights Act that passed in 1964 was just that. It was a single act. Another one followed, one to guarantee their right to vote in 1965, and then another one and another one. And in that sweep of history led by the resonant voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., America corrected wrongs with the Immigration and Nationality Services Act of 1965 that finally admitted anyone other than European to the United States, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968 that said that we can't talk about living together unless we could live together. More quietly, these acts have been preceded by laws that guaranteed that Native Americans who had been here long before we imagined America but weren't fully granted the right to vote in the United States as citizens until 1957. With these acts, with these steps, men and women from every background began to be treated as wholly American. Act by act, we reshaped our laws to recognize our obligation to the powerful dream of equality, one step at a time. On its face, one step at a time is a phrase that urges patience, and when I saw it, when I was invited to speak, I thought one step at a time, that just sounds wrong. It sounds slow and boring and plodding. It sounds not audacious enough, because it suggests that we have no right to expect immediate results to intractable problems. For a nation that has grappled with its demons since the first colonist imported and purchased the first slave to pick tobacco in Jamestown in 1619, one step at a time can seem like a really long time. In an age of current and instant action, of devices that can find answers in a millisecond, one step at a time sounds like an act of cowardice. When violence can visit us in every corner of our worlds, when no person of any age can lay absolute claim to safety, the slowness of change can seem deadly. And yet the power of America is grounded in exactly such a strategy. Dr. King understood that we couldn't solve the evils of racism and neglect in a single burst of human kindness or in an act of contrition, because people aren't made that way. We are walking contradictions of both lovely vision and frightening prejudice. We hold honesty and selfishness in both hands. We look at each other searching for stories that we tell ourselves about our own humanity. And when we fail to see something we can understand, we lash out, or worse, we turn away. The painful and profound work of finding the beloved country will continue for as long as difference exists between us. But that's not a tragedy, that's a challenge. Because what's demanded of us, what Dr. King dreamed of, is that the forward progress of dismantling discrimination is a daily act of decision. One step at a time, one person at a time, one moment at a time, we decide, each of us individually and collectively, not to be dissuaded by race, by color, by nationality, by religion, by sexuality, by status, by poverty. We, one step at a time, decide to be better people. That's what he was calling on us to do. We are a nation that's marked by movements to liberate African Americans, to liberate the Latino population, to acknowledge and celebrate the Asian American population, to welcome back to their own land the Native Americans, to recognize that women and the disabled and the LGBT community and the poor are all a part of the fabric of who we are as Americans. And even after the civil rights movement has become an historical discovery, we continue to bend our laws towards a more perfect union. Recent Supreme Court cases have enshrined new moments of freedom, and some of us aren't so happy about that. But at the same time, that same court has chipped away at battles already won, because one step at a time doesn't always mean we're going in the right direction. Our very language of acts and movements, and that's how we talk about things, is grounded in the realization that every change happens one step at a time. The question is, will that step be forward towards equality and justice and righteousness, or we step back, driven by political machinations to justify the erosion of rights? As I said, I grew up in Mississippi, a state that has been defined by the struggle, by the decision of where our steps will take us, and a lot of times we make the wrong move. And in my adopted home of Georgia, we too fight with our consciousness to determine where we're going to move next. In my family, despite the times we spent on public assistance or without running water, my parents taught us that there was only one direction, and that direction was forward. Our education was gained by the contorted act of living on the poor black street on the middle-class white side of town next to the good school. My parents had to do a lot of research without the help of Google Maps to get us a good education. But what they also did was make sure we volunteered. Now, we were in and out of poverty, but my parents said no matter how little we had, there was always someone with less, and it was our job to serve that person. So when we complained about not being able to go on vacation with our friends who talked of Disney World, my parents took us to a juvenile justice facility to work with children who had no freedom. And when we would whine about the fact that we were eating what we called mom's specialty, which was whatever rice and meat that she could find at the grocery store that week, when we were having that for the 5th week in a row, they took us to a soup kitchen so we could understand the fight against hunger. My parents were deeply manipulative people. But what they understood was that it was one step at a time, one moment at a time, and if they wanted to grow children who would be good adults, who would be good Americans, then we could never let ourselves be grounded in our own lack, but that we always had to strive for more and recognize that that struggle was a common struggle, was a joint struggle, was an American struggle. Because America is grounded in a similar notion. Our successes are not simply our own, but a borrowed legacy that requires that we share our victories with others. We are obliged to think more deeply and learn more broadly so that we can in turn enrich those around us. And more than our individual triumphs, like the privilege of sitting in this place and celebrating freedoms won on this wonderful morning, we are responsible for those who have never dreamed of the lives that each of you live, who have never seen the inside of a banquet hall, have never felt the warmth of communion. We are each personally responsible for every person not in this room, and for that I blame Dr. King. Because of his courage and his challenges, we all know now that we can do better, that we can be better. We know that not one of us, not one of you has the right to do less than continue his legacy of change. Yet Dr. King and others dream so broadly that we Americans sometimes get scared of our own capacity. And there's no time worse than election years to realize that. Because his admonition, the power of his dream, suggested that America could guarantee the rights of all citizens, and that those under our protection, whether citizen or no, would enjoy the full measure of justice, because simply being here entitles you to justice. He began this audacious action by lifting up the fight for civil rights, grounded in racial equality, but his work and the work of thousands of more whose names go unmentioned did not stop at the water's edge, and it did not end in 1968. His work, his legacy demands that we move forward to protect those who continue to face discrimination. Theirs, ours, is a constant movement that seeks not only to remedy the historical hypocrisy that pretended that all rights were protected as equal, but to everyday act to secure the freedoms that we take for granted. We must practice courage and reject cynicism. The language of movement of one step at a time recognizes that we Americans can be timid and make mistakes. That for every moment like this morning where we embrace the broadest notions of who we are and whose we are, we become frightened of shadows. Bullies with microphones and Twitter accounts tell us to be afraid of the other, to fear religions that differ from our own, to blame our economic insecurity on the darkness of skin rather than a finely wrought system of economic inequality. It tells us to take up arms rather than to lift up our voices when differences become too much. Instead of listening to their rhetoric, we have to focus on the pitfalls of disparate sentencing and anti-immigrant legislation and outlawing gay adoption and permitting the scourge of homelessness in a nation of abundance. We have to embrace courage and reject cynicism. We must be honest with ourselves. We have to be honest with ourselves and about our own prejudices. One step at a time means we have to evolve with our society that the things I knew as a child, I do not know as an adult. I did not know that Google existed, and I still don't understand Snapchat. But that doesn't mean they don't exist, and it doesn't mean that I get to hold myself to the prejudices of my youth and not embrace the realities of my present, and more importantly, realize that there are things I don't know that are waiting around the corner. We have to be honest with ourselves, because only in honesty can our prejudices be acknowledged and overcome. We can never bridge the chasm between what is right and what is expedient unless we are willing to acknowledge that that chasm exists. And we must be agitators and activists who see the long arc of history, because the constant demand of progress is yoked to a patience that is a profound calling. It is why each of us is here this early in the morning, Michelle, to talk about and think about how we can be better than we have been. It is the call to register voters who don't know that they have a right to speak, to cast our ballots in every single election, Mayor Denson, and not just the ones we like. It is the responsibility to hold our allies on social media to a higher standard than a really funny insult and a nice meme. It is the obligation to take this time of learning, students, as the gift it is to fully exploit the rare opportunity of becoming better men and women simply with your minds, because this time will not come again. Regardless of your stage in life or your station in life, one step at a time, the power of Dr. King's dream must live in each of us and must be realized every single day. Because one step at a time is not an act of cowardice. It is an exercise of bravery. Because the power of our dreams require constant action, a constant movement forward. But I'm here today to tell you that we have to move deliberately, that we can move deliberately, that his dream lives on in each of us, and that we each hold his mantle and we each hold his challenge. We have to move forward because our eyes are constantly on that prize that has eluded us for too long but is tantalizingly close. We are Americans because we believe in justice and liberty for all. Thank you.